Thomas Mitchell never considered himself particularly special. Working as a radio astronomer at the university's observatory, his nights usually consisted of cataloging distant signals and drinking too much coffee. But on this autumn night, his mundane routine would be forever altered by a simple mistake. The observatory's main computer hummed quietly as Thomas gathered his things, his mind already drifting toward his warm bed at home. The digital clock on the wall blinked 11:47 p.m. He'd stayed later than usual, fascinated by an unusual signal pattern that had appeared briefly before vanishing into the cosmic static. Now, exhaustion tugged at his consciousness as he drove home through the quiet suburban streets. Arriving at his modest apartment, Thomas fumbled with his keys, barely registering the cool metal in his fingers. He pushed the door open, dropped his bag by the entrance, and walked straight to his bedroom, not bothering to check if the door had properly closed behind him. It hadn't. The first sign that something was different came as a subtle change in the air, a slight shift in temperature, a whisper of movement that shouldn't have been there. Thomas lay on his bed, still fully clothed, hovering in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep when he felt it, a presence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Opening his eyes, he found himself staring into the face of something that defied explanation. Standing at the foot of his bed was a figure that seemed to bend the very rules of reality. Her form was humanoid, but there was nothing human about the way her skin seemed to ripple with patterns of bioluminescence, or how her eyes held the depth of entire galaxies. "You've been listening," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Thomas's teeth vibrate. It wasn't a question. Thomas tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The being, he couldn't think of her as anything else, moved closer with a fluid grace that made him question whether she was actually walking or simply flowing through space itself. "The signals you detected tonight," she continued, "they were not meant for human ears." "Not yet." Finally finding his voice, Thomas managed to whisper, What are you?" A smile played across her features, though it held no warmth. "I am Nexera, observer of the third sphere. And you, Thomas Mitchell, have inadvertently stumbled upon something far larger than yourself." The name she spoke, his name, sent a chill down his spine. He hadn't told her who he was, hadn't spoken a word until now. Yet she knew him, knew about the signals he'd detected at work. The implications made his head spin. "Your species has an unfortunate habit of reaching beyond its grasp," Nexera said, her form shifting slightly as she moved around the room, examining his belongings with an unsettling intensity. "Those signals you detected were encrypted communications between our outposts. The fact that your primitive equipment could even detect them is concerning." Thomas sat up slowly, his scientific mind beginning to overcome his initial fear. "Are you saying there are more of you watching us?" Nexera turned to face him, her otherworldly eyes fixing him with a penetrating stare. "We have always watched. It is our purpose. But now..." She paused, and for a moment Thomas thought he saw something like concern flash across her alien features. "Now the boundaries between our worlds are growing thin. And we are not the only ones watching." A cold weight settled in Thomas's stomach as the implications of her words sank in. His discovery wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a warning. And as he sat there, watching this impossible being move through his bedroom like a ghost, he realized that his life's work had led him to a crossroads he never could have anticipated. Nexera's words hung in the air like a physical presence, making the room feel smaller with each passing moment. Thomas found himself studying her movements, the way she seemed to exist slightly out of sync with reality itself, as though she were a projection from another dimension that didn't quite align with our own. "These others you mentioned," Thomas ventured, his scientific curiosity gradually overtaking his fear, "what are they?" The alien being's bioluminescent patterns shifted, creating ripples of deep purple that reminded Thomas of cosmic nebulae. "They are the Void Hunters," she said, her harmonic voice carrying an edge of something that might have been fear. "While we observe and preserve, they consume and destroy. They seek weaknesses in reality itself, tears in the fabric between dimensions. And your species? She trailed off, her galaxy-filled eyes fixing him with an intense stare. We're creating those tears, aren't we? Thomas felt his throat go dry as the pieces began falling into place. Our experiments, our technology, we're weakening something we don't even understand. Nexera moved to his window, her form casting no reflection in the glass. Your quantum experiments, your particle accelerators, your desperate attempts to pierce the veil of space-time, each one sends ripples through the multiverse. Small at first, barely noticeable. But they accumulate, like hairline cracks in a dam. Thomas thought back to the strange signals he detected at the observatory. The transmission I picked up tonight was a warning, Nexera finished. The Void Hunters have noticed your world. They're gathering, drawn by the weakening barriers. My people try to repair the damage, to reinforce the walls between realities, but your species keeps creating new fractures faster than we can seal them. Standing slowly, Thomas moved to his desk where star charts and radio signal analyses lay scattered. His life's work suddenly seemed both critically important and terrifyingly dangerous. Why tell me this? Why not appear to someone with more influence, a government leader, or... Because you understand the language of the cosmos, Nexera interrupted, turning from the window. You've spent your life listening to the whispers of distant stars. And now, Thomas Mitchell, you must listen to something far more crucial. She raised her hand, and suddenly the air between them seemed to crystallize. Images formed in the space, mathematical equations, waveforms, patterns that made Thomas's mind ache as he tried to comprehend them. These are the frequencies at which reality resonates, she explained. The harmonics that hold the multiverse in balance. Your experiments are creating dissonance, drawing the attention of things that should never have noticed your existence. Thomas watched, transfixed, as the equations danced and shifted. To his surprise, he found he could almost understand them. They were like nothing in human mathematics, yet they spoke to something deep within his scientist's soul. What can I do? I'm just one person. Nexera's form flickered slightly, like a candle in a breeze. You can listen. Learn. And when the time comes, you can help your people understand the true cost of their ambitions. Because if humanity continues on its current path. Her patterns darkened to a deep, foreboding crimson. The Void Hunters will not be gentle in their feeding. A distant sound caught Thomas's attention, something like thunder, but wrong somehow, as though it were coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Nexera's head snapped up, her entire form tensing. They're testing the barriers, she whispered, her harmonics taking on a sharp, urgent quality. They can sense the weaknesses your world has created. The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. Their conversation wasn't just theoretical, this was happening now, and humanity's ignorance of the danger made it no less real. As he watched Nexera's form ripple with concern, he realized that his accidental discovery of their signals might be the only warning humanity would get before the walls between realities came crashing down. The strange thunder grew louder, seeming to reverberate through Thomas's bones. Outside his window, the night sky had taken on an odd, shimmering quality, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt, except these distortions were in the fabric of reality itself. Can they break through? Thomas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nexera's form pulsed with waves of deep blue urgency. Not yet. But they're probing, testing. Your world's experiments have created weak points, like microscopic tears in a cosmic fabric. Small now, but growing. She moved to his computer, her elongated fingers hovering over the keyboard. Suddenly, his screen came alive with data, streams of numbers and symbols that no human programming could have produced. Look, she commanded. These are the readings from your observatory, but decoded through our understanding of dimensional frequencies. Thomas leaned forward, his scientific mind racing to comprehend what he was seeing. The patterns were beautiful in their complexity, but terrifying in their implications. What he had thought were random space phenomena were actually tears in spacetime, growing larger with each new human experiment. The particle accelerator tests next month, he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. They're planning to push the energy levels higher than ever before. Yes, Nexera confirmed, her harmonic voice tight with concern. If those tests proceed as planned, they will create a tear large enough for the Void Hunters to force their way through. And once they have a foothold in your reality. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implications were clear in the way her bioluminescent patterns darkened to nearly black. But we can't just stop all scientific progress, Thomas argued, though his voice lacked conviction. Our pursuit of knowledge, our drive to understand the universe, it's fundamental to who we are. Nexera turned to him, her galaxy-filled eyes somehow softer than before. Understanding is not the problem, Thomas. It's the method. Your species rushes forward, blind to the damage you cause in your haste. There are other ways to explore the cosmos, safer paths to knowledge. Another otherworldly rumble shook the room, closer this time. Thomas watched in horror as small objects on his desk began to vibrate, as if reality itself was becoming unstable. Nexera's form flickered more intensely, like a television signal fighting through interference. They're getting stronger, she said, her voice carrying harmonics of barely contained fear. The barriers between dimensions were never meant to endure this kind of assault. We need to act now. What can we do? Thomas asked, his heart racing. How do we stop this? Nexera's pattern shifted to a deep, pulsing purple. I can show you how to modify your equipment at the observatory. You can use it to detect the tears before they become critical. But more importantly. She paused, her form solidifying as she moved closer to him, you need to understand what you're really seeing. She reached out, her fingers touching his forehead. Instantly, Thomas's mind exploded with visions. He saw the universe not as human eyes perceived it, but as it truly was, a vast, interconnected web of realities, each one delicate yet resilient, all part of a cosmic dance that had continued since the beginning of time. And in that magnificent complexity, he saw the dark spaces where the Void Hunters lurked, patient and hungry, waiting for their chance to break through. The visions faded, leaving Thomas gasping, his mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. That's what's really out there? What we've been blindly pushing against? Yes, Nexera said softly. Your instruments see only shadows of this truth. But now you understand why we watch, why we try to maintain the balance. And why the Void Hunters must never be allowed to enter your world. A sudden crash from outside made them both turn. Through his window, Thomas could see the night sky beginning to fracture, like cracks spreading across black glass. The distant sound of car alarms suggested he wasn't the only one noticing that something was very wrong with reality tonight. The fractures in the night sky spread like a spiderweb, each new crack accompanied by that impossible thunder. Thomas watched as streetlights began to flicker, their steady electric glow disrupted by whatever forces were pressing against the barriers of reality. We need to get to the observatory, Nexera said, her voice carrying harmonics of urgency. Your equipment, with modifications, might help us stabilize the local dimensional field before the tears become critical. Thomas grabbed his keys, but Nexera shook her head, her bioluminescent patterns swirling with dark purpose. We don't have time for human transportation. She extended her hand, and Thomas hesitated only a moment before taking it. The world shifted. Reality seemed to fold around them like origami, and Thomas felt his stomach lurch as space itself compressed and expanded. In the span of a heartbeat, they were standing in the observatory's main control room. Thomas stumbled, fighting down a wave of nausea. That was efficient, he managed to say, leaning against a console for support. Through the observatory's dome, he could see the fractures in the sky more clearly now. They were spreading faster, and in the spaces between the cracks, something darker than darkness itself seemed to writhe and pulse. Nexera moved to the main array controls, her fingers dancing over the keyboards with impossible speed. The Void Hunters are using your particle accelerator experiments as focal points, she explained. Each test has left a residual weakness in spacetime. They're connecting these points, creating a network of fractures that will allow them to breach multiple locations simultaneously. Thomas watched as his familiar equipment began displaying readings he'd never seen before. Those patterns, they're similar to what I detected earlier tonight. Yes. What you discovered was an echo of our attempts to repair the damage. But now. She gestured to a particular set of readings that seemed to pulse with an ominous rhythm. They're no longer just testing the barriers. They're actively trying to break through. A deep, resonant vibration shook the building, making the sensitive equipment rattle in its housings. Through the windows, Thomas could see other lights coming on in nearby buildings as more people awoke to the growing chaos. If they break through, what exactly happens? Thomas asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. Nexera's patterns shifted to a deep, warning red. They consume reality itself. They feed on the energy released when dimensions collapse. Your world would become their feeding ground, and your people. She paused, her galaxy-filled eyes meeting his. The lucky ones wouldn't survive to see what comes after. Thomas felt cold sweat on his forehead as he processed her words. But why now? Humanity's been conducting these experiments for years. Because you've reached a tipping point, she explained, still working at the controls. Your quantum experiments, your attempts to probe the fundamental nature of reality, they've created a cascading effect. Each new test weakens the barriers exponentially more than the last. The Void Hunters have been patient, waiting for the perfect moment. And now. Another tremor shook the building, stronger this time. Outside, car alarms began blaring in chorus, and Thomas could hear distant shouts of confusion and fear. We need to reconfigure your main array, Nexera said, her form flickering more intensely now. If we can match the resonant frequency of the dimensional barriers, we might be able to reinforce them temporarily. But we'll need more power than your facility currently has available. Thomas moved to the power distribution panel, his mind racing. We could reroute power from the university's main grid, but that would black out half the campus. A small price compared to what's coming, Nexera replied, her voice grim. But there's something else you need to understand, Thomas. Even if we succeed in stabilizing the barriers tonight, it's only a temporary solution. As long as humanity continues its current path of experimentation. She was cut off by a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a vast, hungry roar that made Thomas's teeth vibrate and his vision blur. Through the dome, he saw one of the larger cracks in the sky begin to split wide open, revealing a void that seemed to swallow both light and hope. The void that opened above the observatory seemed to devour the very air around it. Thomas watched in horror as small objects, leaves, papers, even birds, began to drift upward, drawn toward the tear in reality. Nexera's form pulsed with urgent patterns of deep crimson and violet as her fingers flew across the modified equipment. They're breaking through faster than I anticipated, she said, her harmonic voice tight with tension. Your world's dimensional barriers are weaker than we realized. The experiments have done more damage than we thought possible. Emergency sirens began wailing across the campus as the city's authorities responded to a crisis they couldn't possibly understand. Through the observatory's windows, Thomas could see people pointing at the sky, filming with their phones, unaware that they were witnessing the prelude to their world's potential extinction. The power grid, Nexera urged. We need it now. Thomas rushed to the main control panel, his hands shaking as he input the override codes. This will trigger every safety alarm in the system, he warned. Emergency services will be here within minutes. Minutes we may not have, Nexera replied, her galaxy-filled eyes fixed on the readings flowing across the screens. The Void Hunters are coordinating their breach points. They're not just trying to break through, they're attempting to shatter the dimensional barriers completely. As if in response to her words, another tier opened in the sky, this one closer to the horizon. The two voids seemed to pulse in sync, creating a resonance that made Thomas's bones ache. He completed the power override sequence, and the observatory's lights flickered as electricity was diverted from across the campus. Nexara's modified equipment hummed to life, projecting beams of energy that Thomas's human eyes could barely perceive. They intersected at points in the sky near the tiers, creating a web of force that seemed to push back against the encroaching void. "It's working," she said, her patterns shifting to a more hopeful blue. "The energy matrix is helping to reinforce the local dimensional barriers." But she paused, her form flickering intensely. "There's something else. Something wrong." Thomas moved to her side, studying the readings. Even with his new understanding of dimensional physics, much of it was beyond his comprehension. But one pattern stood out, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. "They're adapting," Nexara whispered, her voice carrying harmonics of dread. "The Void Hunters, they're learning from our defenses, finding new frequencies to exploit. And they're not alone anymore." Through the tiers in reality, Thomas caught glimpses of shapes that his mind refused to fully process, vast, shifting forms that seemed to fold through dimensions he couldn't perceive. The sirens grew louder as emergency vehicles approached the observatory, their lights casting eerie patterns through the dimensional distortions. "What do you mean, not alone?" Thomas asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Other entities, drawn by the disturbance," Nexara explained, her fingers dancing across the controls as she attempted to adjust their defenses. "The barriers between realities are like a dam. Once the first cracks appear, the pressure only builds. We've drawn attention from beings that make the Void Hunters seem benign in comparison." The equipment sparked, and one of the energy beams flickered dangerously. Outside, the first police cars pulled into the observatory parking lot, their occupants stepping out to stare in bewilderment at the impossible scene above them. "Thomas," Nexara said, her voice suddenly gentle despite the chaos around them, "there's something I haven't told you. Something you need to understand about why I chose to appear to you specifically tonight."